with his sixth speech from the Competent Communicators Manual entitled The Little Things. And he starts.
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and most welcome guests. All my life, I've been besieged by two conflicting statements. The first, don't sweat the small stuff. And the second, it's the little things that make life worth living. I'm glad you appreciate that. But I always wondered, if it's the little things that make life worth living, then shouldn't we sweat them? I always figured that these two statements were mutually exclusive, that they were alternatives. You had to choose one or the other. But this year, I finally learned how to marry both thoughts. My dad and I have always had a close relationship. Even though my parents divorced at a young age, he made a concerted effort to be there for me. When I was younger and into soccer, he used to take me to games and cheer me on from the sideline. And he always helped me with my studies. When it was time to go to college, my dad wrote a 40-page pamphlet of tips to succeed, both inside and outside of the classroom. He wanted me to get the most out of my experience. My dad showed me the world, literally. He took me on trips throughout the globe, surfing in Costa Rica, hiking Machu Picchu in Peru, and he took me to his hometown of Budapest so I could learn more about my family history. It's safe to say that my dad was there for me in a lot of ways. But this year, I started to question our relationship, and I'll never forget the day it happened. It was a Monday, and every Monday I go to my mom's house before ToastMasters to have a little pre-ToastMasters meal and catch up. But on this particular Monday, I could sense something had happened. There was something different in my mom's demeanor. And when I got there, she said, "We need to talk." And when mom says we need to talk, I know something serious had happened. So she sat me down and told me the news. My dad was going to get remarried. I was shocked. I was shaken. I had no idea that this was even in the works. My dad and I had just gone on a 3-week trip to Asia, and he never once mentioned that he was even considering getting married. I wondered why I had to find out through my mom and not through him. I felt disappointed that he would invite somebody to be part of our family, and he hadn't even told me about it. So I began to question my relationship with my dad. Who was this guy? Seriously, why wouldn't he tell me something so important? I felt a distance growing. I felt that our relationship might never be the same. 3 weeks ago, my dad called me, and he said he was experiencing some chest pain, and he was going to go to the doctor the following day for an examination. He assured me that everything was going to be fine, but it wasn't. After the examination, the doctor recommended that my dad have a triple bypass surgery. And he was placed on the surgery schedule the following day. On the day of surgery, my mom and I went to the hospital first thing in the morning to be there with my dad before he went into surgery. He gave us a note, and after we wheeled him into the operating room, we opened it. It was his will. Adrenaline rushed through my body. I started pacing up and down the hallways of the hospital. I started thinking about all the ways my dad had been there for me. How he would always push me to be my very best. How he wouldn't accept less. I started thinking about that pamphlet he wrote for me, that college advice pamphlet to help me get the most out of my college experience. A pamphlet that he turned into a book that he dedicated to me. I kept pacing up and down the hallway of the hospital, and then I stopped. what if I never see my dad again? Suddenly all the baggage about his remarriage, it didn't matter. It was a small thing. I was sweating a small thing when there was something so much more important, something bigger, his life. And fortunately, my dad made it through the surgery, but the next few weeks of recovery were particularly tough. And I don't know how I would have gotten through it if it wasn't for the support of my family and friends. They called, emailed, texted, just to ask, how's your dad doing? How are you doing? Friends I hadn't heard from in months were calling just to wish their best. And they would call back a couple days later just to check on the progress, to make sure nothing had changed. It's the little things, a phone call, a gesture to show that you care, that made all the difference. Last Wednesday, my dad was discharged from the hospital, and he's well on the road to recovery. And I feel lucky that he's still alive. And I feel lucky to have learned a valuable lesson through this entire experience. At the end of the day, I'm always going to have little differences with the people close to me. We are all different. We have different opinions. We have different hobbies. We have different ways of expressing ourselves. I may say tomato, and Annie may say tomato. And sometimes those differences, they cause us to butt heads. But it's those differences, those little nuances that challenge us, that force us to become better, that make life worth living. I learned to embrace those differences. I learned to not sweat the small things, like how something was communicated to me, when there are bigger things, like life and death, in the mix. And I'd like to leave you all with a quote from John Kabat-Zinn, who started a stress reduction clinic. And his quote was this: "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn how to surf." Madam ToastMaster.